Okay, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining our webinar today. Just so that everyone's aware, the lines are muted right now. We've got quite a large number of people on the line. So if you have questions as we go through this, please type them into the Q&A window or the chat window that you'll find in the Zoom interface. We'll get to those questions either as we go through the presentation or we'll answer them at the end. Planning to keep this to sort of 30-40 minutes, depending on how many questions we have. The webinar is being recorded, so we'll send out a link afterwards, and you can always find these webinars up on our blog on the website metricinsights.com/blog. So if you want to go and review these with your team afterwards. So I'm Mike Smitherman. I've got Louis Bedard with me today. Morning, Louis.
Good morning.
And today we're going to be covering the topic of anomaly detection. So we'll give you a quick recap of push intelligence, set the ground for what we're talking about here, but really focus on different types of anomalies that we can uncover with the Metric Insights platform. So a quick recap, for those that have been on previous webinars, you'll remember that the problem that we're solving with Metric Insights is how do we get users in an organization engaged with data. We're all overwhelmed with too much information, too many metrics, and we need to, for people who have a couple of minutes each day to think about data, we need to get the right data into their hands at the right time. And you'll know if you've been on previous webinars, we do that through sort of four main pillars of the platform. The first is the consolidated portal, where you can bring all your content from any BI tool, database, operational system into a single interface for your users so they can easily find what they need to. Through distribution, the concept of pushing out content to users based on what they might be interested in, either via email, through the phone, or other systems. What we're talking about today, anomaly detection. If you're going to send users information about what's changing in the data, make sure it's critical information that they can take action on. And that is the fourth piece, giving them a way of acknowledging when you tell them about things in the data so that they can take action and resolve any issues. So the platform covers these four pillars. Today, we're going to focus on the orange circle there, anomaly detection, and what that means and how you set it up. So most BI tools have some sort of alerting capability in them, and that typically goes along the line of select a metric, set a threshold, tell me if that threshold is met. Now, using that sort of functionality typically poses quite a lot of problems. How do you pick the threshold that you want to be told about? How do you do this across thousands of metrics, which have potentially thousands of different dimension values? How do you control security and permissions around that? And oftentimes, if you're just setting a threshold or a target to be alerted on, if you're conscious enough to set that threshold, that metric is probably very important to you. And honestly, you probably know about hitting that threshold long before you're alerted to it. And so reality is that type of functionality within most BI tools is rarely used. And the reason is that uncovering anomalies in a meaningful way, finding things that you didn't know about, is complex. It's difficult. Our data is complex. And so we're going to talk through different types of anomalies and exceptions that we uncover on the platform to solve this problem. And the first is the concept of time series data. So for those on the last webinar, you'll know we introduced the concept of metrics on the platform. And metrics, again, are time series pieces of information, daily sales, hourly website visits, often dimensioned by different values. So daily sales by country, website visits by device. And you'll remember when we read in metrics into the platform, we're also profiling those metrics for how they're changing over time. So why is that important? Is it allows us to then set up the concept of time series anomaly detection on those metrics. So let's look at how that works. So if we take an example like our daily sales by country, The process that the platform goes through every night is that that metric is incrementally updated with the sales for each of the countries that we have. It's profiling how those metrics and country values have changed since the previous period. And then we're saying, okay, there's two types of anomaly rules that we can apply to that information. The concept of global rules. So these are predefined rule templates that any new metric added to the platform get evaluated against. So based on the type of metric and the frequency. So this could be along the lines of, for any daily metric that we add to the platform, evaluate a 30-day moving average and highlight any data points that fall outside of 2 standard deviations from the moving average as statistical outliers. So that's important because immediately, without having to think about anomalies or rules or alerts, the platform will automatically start to highlight outliers in the data. You can then apply metric level rules. So those metrics that are important to your business, that you have specific criteria around that you want to set. We can then set user preferences, so who gets told about them, and then we distribute that out to users. So let's switch over to the demo and look at this sort of time series anomaly detection.
Fantastic. Thanks, Mike. Great. So during our last webinar, we did the content creation, and amongst this content creation, you'll remember the homepage of Metric Insights. We did build this particular tile, was daily sales here, which was our metric that we built during that last webinar. So this is a typical time series. This is tracking daily sales for wine stores that tracks wine sales and wine accessory across 8 different countries around the world. And Mike just talked about this. Is the first thing we're trying to do here is to detect statistical anomalies. So if I switch my view from standard view to statistical view, what you'll end up seeing is that you're looking at the time series data of 4 weeks worth of data. This is my blue line there. Then the red line represents the moving average. So therefore, the band around this moving average, a standard deviation here, and data points that falls outside of the standard deviation of this moving average, such as this data point here and that data point down below, represents statistical anomaly. And that, as Mike mentioned before, is done because we have the ability to not just load data points inside of Metric Insights, but we're also profiling it. We're calculating the percentage changes, the moving average, minimum and maximum. And we're doing this for all data points that we're bringing in the platform. In this particular example here, we have 9 months worth of data, and you can see where the platform detected those statistical anomalies. And this is done across all the different dimensional values that we have. So every time we're loading those data points, we are automatically detecting statistical anomalies. Now, please note that the length of your moving average and the size of your standard deviation can be configured per KPIs, and you can adjust them this way.
So one, as I mentioned in the slides, one key thing is, as you add metrics to the platform, you don't want to think about what sort of rules and anomalies you want to look for initially. We want to have a standard set of analysis, such as this one. You can set up different statistical criteria, as Louis said, but standard set of analysis that is going to automatically start to suggest outliers to you, so that then you can start to learn more about the metric and how it trends and what might be important to keep an eye on. Shouldn't have to do any work to figure that out.
Absolutely, it's very, very useful, of course. So that is the first part, the statistical anomaly, and that leads us to talk about also the ability to create sets of rules on your data where you can set some alerts on these rules. And for us to be able to set rules on our system is pretty simple. So creating any sets of new rules like this. So let's go step by step in this process here. The first is you need to select what type of alerting rules you want to use. And Mike talked about the threshold-based alerting, so we can do it too. Pretty simple to set up in our system. But we found out over time that there are some more useful alerting rules that can be set up on your system, such as comparing your data points against prior value, or even better, averages of prior value, where you may be able to compare your Mondays to Mondays, your Saturday to Saturday, 12 o'clock noon to 12 o'clock noon, January to January, and so on. You can even compare your data points against volatility level band, where you may want to be alerted if your data points falls between 1 to 2 standard deviation, but alert someone else if your data points falls between 2 to 3 standard deviation, and so on. It's even possible to compare your data points against target. And finally, when you start to combine any of these alerting rules together, you can create very complex alerting rules, by the combination of multiple alerts.
So typically the process an installation or a customer goes through is, with the global alerts, we start to automatically suggest outliers. But then as you learn more about the data and the metrics, as Louis is saying, you want to start to layer on additional intelligence to what anomalies you're uncovering based on things like seasonality or escalation paths that you want to put to the anomalies.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Good point. So for today's example, we'll select here the averages of prior value, and then we just have to go ahead and build our criteria. So for this particular example, what I'd like to do is I'd like to be alerted if my data points here are, let's say, 10% above or below the average of the same day of the week for the last 30 days. And for this particular anomalies here, I like to be alerted every time an anomaly happens. So once every time, I would like to exclude my statistical anomaly. And then I'd like to receive this particular alert. I have many ways to receive it. Can receive it via an email digest immediately and via the browser. If I want to receive it immediately when the alert is happening, I can receive it via email, SMS text, or even via our phone app. So this particular example, I'd like to receive it via email. I'd like to receive it not just the first time the condition happens, but every time it happens.
We're going to drill into distribution more in a future email. The key here is we want to avoid spamming people with too many alerts and too many anomalies. And so that's one way of trying to manage that.
Great, absolutely. And then here, when we define our selection criteria, we have the ability to simulate based on the last 30 days or whatever amount of days you want to see for how many alerts will be generated in the system here. And what I'm doing is literally running the simulation against real data to see if this particular criteria that I've set is, it's large enough to be able to give me the important alerts without requiring me to, to dial those down. So it really helps you calibrate, in other words, the sensitivity of the alerts that you're putting down here.
So remember, what we're trying to achieve with the whole platform is how do we distill down lots of information that's available to the user into a few meaningful pieces of information, and simulating these alerts, I think, is one way of doing that, right?
Absolutely, Mike. And then taking a look at this, at 10% here for this particular alert, it looks like we'll be generating quite a few alerts. As a matter of fact, will be triggered 54 times in the last 30 days. So that seems to be a lot to me. We want to tone this down a little bit. So we'll increase the percentage, change the criteria, and see how many alerts will have been triggered on this next example at 18%, and creating a more manageable alert at this point.
So this is going through, again, each of our filter values, looking at the metric over the time period that we said, and really, generating the results out of the rule that Louis got at the top there.
Absolutely. And in this case, Mike, we have 20 criteria where the rule will be, the alert will be triggered. So I think it's a nice selection. One last thing I'd like to do also in our simulation, sometimes you might be interested in looking at one particular country, and for Canada, it's telling me it will generate 5 alerts. So I can simulate that, and for that particular country, and see where those alerts will be generated. So here we have a good example of that.
And this is, in this case, this is useful because we're looking for sort of good and bad anomalies. So it gives you an indication of kind of what the distribution of that is, right, across the data set that we're looking at.
Absolutely. Then the next step in the process becomes to create what content do we want to receive? How do we want to receive this content? So you can imagine here, you can customize the subject of your email, the way you would receive data in your phone alert messaging, or other types of way you want to receive this data. So everything can be customized and formatted here. and even the payload in itself. What type of payloads you want to receive? In my example here, I feel it will be interesting if I could have a the payload to be actually a Tableau dashboard that would put part of the email when this alert is being generated. So now you have your full visual of what the email would look like, and send myself a test, and there you go. And finally, the last piece is to be able to attach a workflow.
So as I mentioned before, the next webinar is really going to drive into the distribution aspect, sort of what Louis was touching on at the end. But we're going to take a quick look at one of those things now, because it's very related to this concept of metric anomalies. And the concept here is, for your most critical metrics or anomalies, if you're going to go to the trouble of uncovering them, you want to make sure that people are seeing them and taking action on them. And so for that, we have this concept of a managed alert that lets you set essentially a workflow around the triggering of that anomaly. And this can be as simple as requiring someone who's responsible for that metric to acknowledge that the anomaly has been uncovered, to setting up a more complex escalation and collaborative process to resolve the issue. So for an example here, our daily sales in Canada, we find an anomaly. We might assign that to the country manager who owns that metric. He or she might investigate it and see that there are, website problems in the region, so reassigns it to an IT team who sees that, perhaps the issue is related to the website specifically within that region, so reassigns it to the local website admin who goes through, fixes the problem and resolves it. And by pushing the alert through that workflow, we're able to, one, make sure that things aren't getting missed when we uncover these anomalies, but also keep a track of, how was it resolved this time round, so that maybe we can, avoid these things in the future or resolve them quicker.
Fantastic. So based on that, let's attach a workflow to this particular alert we just created together. So in this case here, dealing with sales, I'll attach this to my Sales Up workflow. I'd like to set this particular alert we just set up as a medium priority alert. And as Mike just described, at this point, all I have to do is to assign who will be the assignee and who will receive this particular alert when it's triggered. So you can just subscribe additional users. So in this particular example, I'd like to take a look at all the users in my system, users and users group. I'd like to subscribe Dan and John to this particular alert here. So I'll do this. Their role is going to be the default role. And one thing that I do know is Dan is only interested in following one country in Europe, and that is Germany. So we'll select Germany for Dan. And John, just like myself, will like to be to follow all the different alerts for all the different countries. So this is how I can set things up. And then after that, the default notification could be, for me, I'll receive that immediately, and for everybody else within an hour delay.
So the concept here again is, I keep saying we'll look at this in more detail in the next webinar, but we are going to go through distribution stuff in a couple of weeks. But the key here in the topic of anomaly detection is making sure that users are acknowledging any anomalies that are found. And an example here is if you're going to send them an email showing that anomaly, require them to acknowledge it through clicking on the button, which is tied to that workflow. Without this, how do you know that the user has actually seen the alert in the first place? Absolutely,
Mike. So so in conclusion of that important series we just talked about here, there's two types of alerts. There's the global alerting rule that automatically looks for anomalies in any metrics in the system, such as a statistical anomaly. We just talked about that. We can also create complex metrics level rules and simulate the number of alerts generated based on real historical data. And this will help you, of course, as we discussed, calibrate the rule criteria before you alert your users and not spam them. And finally, assigning an alert to a workflow will ensure that the alerts will be acknowledged, acted upon, and of course, resolved.
All right, so time series alerts focused around metrics, focused around uncovering trends and outliers in metrics. The second type of anomaly that we look for is the concept of exceptions. So what are they? Well, again, we covered the concept of data sets in the last webinar. Go check it out. It's on the blog. And this is the ability for us to take a snapshot of a set of data that could be coming from anywhere, a database, a dashboard that you have, and start to drive different reports within the system that might be meaningful. And one of those is the concept of an exception report, which is a visualization of that data set where we filtered it down based on a set of rules to a manageable set of exceptions that a user can go and take action on. And so, again, what does that look like in terms of setup and flow? And we'll demo this, but we can go against a data source. We can take a snapshot of that data source. We can keep those snapshots historically if we need to look at exceptions historically. But essentially, you'll see that we can apply a set of filters to that data that allows us to distill it down into, again, a manageable set of records that users might want to take action on. We can apply, again, user permissioning to that, so the exceptions get sent to the right user based on their role, and embed that into a report that gets, again, distributed out to the right user at the right time. So Louis, let's go look at exception reports.
Absolutely, thanks, Mike. So in this next example, what I'd like to do is we're dealing here with a sales data set that has been snapshotted daily. You can see a different snapshot that we have here. And where we have, of course, we have our sales, we have our costs, we have our units sold across a combination of country, channel, product category, product subcategory, and product.
You got a lot of rows there, Louis.
Yeah, I got a lot of rows here, over 2,000 rows of data. It's quite too much to make a report out of that. But what I'm interested in finding today is if there are any combination of country, channel, and product where I'm selling product at a loss on any of these particular day. So taking a look at this here, I'm interested, we talked about country, channel, and products. I can remove my product category and my product subcategories. However, I cannot see here if I have any products sold at a loss. So I might need to create a couple of derived fields. The first one I'd like to create is gross margin and gross margin percentage here. So pretty straightforward. I'll do my revenue minus my cost divided by my revenue. Revenue, okay, and this will be validated and added as a field. And I also like to do a profit loss KPI. So we'll call this one profit loss KPI. Looks like I may have done that before. So do my revenue minus my cost, and there we go. Okay, so now I have added those two derived fields. And once I've done that, what I would like to do is to apply the changes to see, to see those calculations being added to the product. And once we've done that, what I'd like to focus on is I'd like to focus on where my gross margin is actually less than 0, right? So what we'll do is we'll just want to see products where I'm losing money. So I'll take my gross margin will be less than a value. In this case, it would be 0. And also,
got a calculation problem. Go gross margin calculation.
Oh, okay.
Bracket, wrong place. Come after cost.
There you go. Thank you. That's better. That will make it better. There you go. Beauty of a live demo. There we go. So now we have our gross margin percentage, and actually, Mike can even apply the default mask here as well to update my field. So there we go. That will make more sense. Now I want to focus on my gross margin that is negative. Will be added that, and also get where my my revenue. My profit loss to get them that are losing more than, let's say, $100 on each and every one of those. So now I'm down to 18 rows, and if I would like something that is less than minus $100, let's see what I can focus this on. So there we go. So now I have a manageable sets of data that I can work with. And these are all the items that I'm either losing a lot of money by gross margin percentage or by my profit and my loss. So at this point, what I'd like to do is I'd like to go ahead and build a report. So I can save this as a view, and we'll call this my view. We'll call it my exception view. And once I have this view that has been saved, I can go ahead and build a report from this particular view. It's a pretty straightforward process where you're enabling the users to work with your data sets, find the results that you like, and then go ahead and build this exception report. So going to my data tab here, the only fields that I said we are interested in is country, channels, and product. Actually, I'd like to move product to be on top of the page here. I don't need to see my profit, my unit. I would like to keep my revenue and put my revenue into a nice format here. Same for my, actually, I'll remove my costs. And then I want to keep my gross margin percentage and my profit and loss as well with a dollar figure. Once I've done that, what I'd like to do as well is to show this report where I can associate it or attach it to a dashboard, to a particular business intelligence dashboard. So it's possible to do this, and that's exactly what I'm doing right now, attaching it to a dashboard. I believe we created in Tableau before. Okay, there you go, and my product here, product name, there we go, okay. And then we go ahead, enable and publish that, and that will go ahead and run this particular report. We can, because I have daily snapshot for about a month and a half worth of data, I will get my exception report to be published, and where I'll see the exception that I have each and every day, and map this out with the dashboard that I just associated this with.
So we snapshotted a dashboard to see what data is available in it. You remember that brought us back about 1,000 rows. We've distilled that down using filter rules into a manageable set of exceptions, and added that to a report and tied it to a dashboard, in this case a Tableau one that we we're interested in providing some meaningful visualizations out of, and that's the report that Louis has here.
Wonderful. So you have your exception report, all the different snapshot, and can go back in time. So Mike, that's the first way we can do this with exception reporting.
Yeah, so the third and final thing we're going to look at is very similar, but it's the concept of what we call change reports. So rather than looking for exceptions in a single snapshot of data, now we're going to look for exceptions or changes between two snapshots of data, and they can be both numerical changes or non-numerical changes. So an example might be, we've got a sales pipeline where we're managing opportunities and their values and what we're going to close this quarter. Every day, I might want to know how that pipeline is changing. And that can be everything from, did any opportunities change in value? Were any opportunities added to the pipeline? Did any opportunities fall out of the pipeline? The only way I can do that is if I'm snapshotting my pipeline every day and then have a way of comparing those snapshots to, again, produce a sort of subset of data that's interesting to me. And so similar to what we just looked at, in this case, we're snapshotting the data again, but we're storing those snapshots for at least 2 days, or as far back as you want to. And when we create our filters this time, you'll see that the filters are comparing previous and current values to again, distill it down into a set of exceptions. We're then, again, applying any user permissions to create the report that we send out. Look at that, Louis.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So now we'll start again with the same data set here. And in this example for a change report, what it will be, what I'd like to do is I'm interested in tracking down the combination of country, channels, and product category where my sales have more than double any day compared to the prior day. So again, look at this data set that I have. I do have daily snapshot. So the first thing that I want to do is to be able to compare the last 2 instances and see if there's any occasions where my sales have more than double. So selecting my country, channel, and we talked about product category. And what I'm interested here is the sum of my sales you know, across those particular fields there. So applying these particular changes here, obviously, will give us our aggregated sum of sales. But what I'm interested in doing is I'm interested in tracking changes between my last two instances of my data. So what I'll do here is I'll select the last two instances of data, and I'm interested in taking a look at the data that has changed. And the criteria that I want to select for this, I want to say, hey, the current sum of my revenue here that I have, is it possible that it's bigger than, more than double the sum of revenue from a prior day? So the sum of revenue that I have here, I would like it to be greater than the prior sum of revenue by any percentages, and in this case here, I would say 100%. So that will tell me that, show me the instances where this have more than double. And in this particular example here, you see that, you know, Australia website visits and wine accessory have more than double. And then you can go back in time, any time or any days, and you'll see where those exceptions have happened. Then I'll spare you the next part of the process, but go again, you would build an exception report as we did before. And the result of this exception report will be slightly different. So in this case, again, so we have our daily snapshot of data. You have all the combination of country, channels, and product category where the exception happens. And then you can go ahead and select any particular of these example here that you have. And the report or the dashboard associated with that is fully interactive. So that's a quick and easy example of doing a change report.
So one final thing we want to show you is these change reports can get pretty sophisticated. So what do I mean by that? Where let's take a look at this dashboard quickly. So this is a BI dashboard. It's in Tableau. In this case, we have 6 different metrics that we're tracking here across many different filter values. So our country, channel, products that we've been looking at, probably 500 to 1,000 different combinations here. How on a daily basis do I know if there's statistical anomalies with any of these metrics? I would have to go through every combination and see whether it generates any outliers, and that's just unreasonable to do even with this fairly small data set. And so what we're able to do is create a specific type of change report that is looking for statistical anomalies in this data set. And let's just quickly run through that, Louis.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, the process is the same, starting with the data set. Mike, we build the statistical data sets here. And then after that, based on the example just talked about, a 30-day moving average, we would like to snapshot our data based on, let's say, the past month worth of data. And then literally you add every combination of country of the different dimensional values that you have. And you can, we can even use the different hierarchies that are being set in your product. So in our example, we know that product is a child of product subcategories, and product subcategories is a child of product categories, and so on. You can set all of those up. You can add your fields that you'd like to calculate. And if there's additional calculation that you want to do, like percent gross margin, things of that nature, then the expression that you would build would be, the similar way that I built my expressions before.
So hang on, there's a lot going on here. So we've taken a data set with multiple metrics and multiple dimensions. And what we're saying is we want to look across all those different, we want the platform to look across all those different combinations, including potentially, the total values of those dimensions. So that's a lot of combinations again here. And look for any statistical outliers that are more than 3 standard deviations from the moving average of the data set that we put in place.
Absolutely, Mike. And then saving it, obviously, we'll go ahead and crunch the numbers and get the output. And we'll spare you the second here, but the output of this type of a calculation will be where you have for each and every KPI the number of standard deviation that will have been calculated and so on. So the system generates a few additional fields that you can use into an exception report. And the last exception report that we have here to show you really highlights exactly that, where you do have, is going back to this dashboard here, are 6 KPIs or 2,000 plus combination of filter values. And the system found out that, for those 8 combination of filters value, those are the KPIs that generates a statistical anomaly. So to use this selection here from friends, where we look at Annabella's special selection, if I select this, the system is actually telling me that there are 4 KPIs here that are going to be generated points outside of 3 standard deviation. And as a matter of fact, this Tableau dashboard confirms that. And I want you to understand and realize also how Metric Insight does pass along the filter combination to your BI tool in order to generate reports like this one.
Obviously, we're using Tableau here, but you could do this with any BI tool. So again, we've gone through potentially thousands of different combinations and narrowed that down to a set of manageable data that users can take action on. So a lot of information, but we covered sort of 3 types of exceptions. You know, we spoke at the beginning about BI tools being able to set up alerts. Hopefully you can see that there's really a lot to doing that successfully on a platform, and that's what Metric Insights is about. So time series, exception reports, change reports with detailed statistical analysis as well. So let's look if there's any Q&A. If there's any questions, then please type them into the chat window or the Q&A window. We've got a couple that have come in here. So let's start answering these. On metric alerts, Louis, can you set different criteria for each of the different dimension values? I don't know whether you want to jump across to the product and
yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. So going back to the charts we generated before, yes, you have the ability to attach particular dimensional values to an alert criteria. So in this example, you can, the selection criteria we made together before, can select it for, you know, any particular values, and even actually assign different dimensional values or different types of alerts to different users.
Okay, another question, who creates alerts? Can users create their own alert rules and exception reports?
Absolutely. Regular users can go ahead. The data has been loaded in the system. Data is there, so go ahead and enable the users to create their own alerts and exception report.
And all that is permission-based, so typically an admin or a set of admins will set up some default criteria, certainly the global alert rules that we spoke about, but if you want to give certain users permissions till they're on their own rules, then you can do that. So look here. How long do you store a history of alerts or exceptions for?
So we store them, we have them in our system, and they stay for the duration. So you can go back in time and see the different types of alerts and exception report that you have. You saw the ability for us to snapshot exception reports and also to create alerts that goes back in time if you want to have historical alerts to be set up. And we keep them in the system all the way till the time you decide that this historical data is not valuable anymore.
All right, so I promised we would keep it 30 to 40 minutes. I think there's a few more questions, but we'll answer them via email as we're up against 10:40 here. Thanks for joining today. If there's any additional questions that you didn't have a chance to ask, then you know, feel free to reach out to myself and Louis on our email addresses here. So we've mentioned in previous webinars, you can go and try some of this stuff at metricinsights.com/trial. We'll spin you up your own instance. And the next webinar, which we're scheduling for May the 3rd, we're really going to talk about the distribution aspect of the platform. So if you're uncovering these anomalies, how do you tell people about them in a meaningful way so, again, they can take action on them? So thanks, Louis. Thanks, everyone, for joining. We'll speak to you next time.
Thank you.